I woke up to the sound of grinding metal and the smell of hot asphalt. That's never a good sign when your bedroom window overlooks your own private road. My name's Xander Truett, and I own the only house on the short gravel lane that runs up to my property legally and officially. Emphasis on private road. So you can imagine my confusion when I looked outside and saw 3 guys in reflective vests installing bright yellow speed bumps. Not little ones either, these were the back-breaking kind that'll rattle your teeth loose at 5 miles per hour. I threw on a hoodie and boots and marched straight down my driveway. "Hey, who authorized this?" I shouted over the noise. One of the workers looked up, mildly annoyed. "We got the work order from the Willow Heights HOA," he said, tapping a clipboard. "Says right here speed control installation on community road." "This isn't a community road," I snapped. "This is my road, it's on my deed," he shrugged. "Take it up with whoever signed the order, we just do the job." I didn't need to ask who signed it. Because as I turned, I saw her standing at the edge of the cul-de-sac, arms crossed like she was posing for a brochure titled How to Ruin Your Neighbor's Day. Vanessa Brandt, HOA president, professional busybody, and full-time pain in the neck. "Vanessa," I barked. She walked over like she owned the pavement under her kitten heels. "Xander, we've had multiple complaints about speeding near your property. The board voted to install speed bumps to protect the children." "What children?" I asked. "I don't have kids, and no one under 12 even lives on this side of the street." "Well, Liam rides his scooter nearby," she said, tossing her blonde bob like that explained everything. "And frankly, your road encourages reckless driving." "We're doing what's best for the community." "Again," I said slowly, "this road is not part of the community, it's private, it's on my land, you can't touch it." She smiled like she was talking to a toddler. "Well, our legal committee determined that your road is adjacent to HOA property, which makes it eligible for common-sense safety improvements." "Your legal committee is your yoga instructor and your cousin Todd," I growled. "You're trespassing." Vanessa turned and strutted off before I could say another word. The crew kept working. I couldn't stop them without risking a scene I'd end up paying for, so I did the next best thing. I started documenting everything: photos, videos, time-stamps. I even pulled up my property survey and deed and left a call with my lawyer. By sundown, there were 3 massive speed bumps drilled into my gravel road, which now looked like it had been chewed up by a drunken construction crew. My own tires kicked up dust and rocks every time I drove over them. That night, I poured myself a drink and started drafting the invoice. Road damage, unauthorized construction, legal fees, and restoration costs. It added up fast, $10,000 even, and I wasn't just sending them a bill. I was preparing for war. HOA story, HOA stories, Homeowners Association stories. I didn't sleep long that night. Sometime around 4 in the morning, headlights bounced across my ceiling as another car crawled over the new terrain they'd carved into my driveway. The noise was different now, louder, sharper. It wasn't just gravel crunching anymore. It was the sound of a road being mistreated. By 7, I was back outside in work boots, clipboard in hand, measuring the width and height of each bump while muttering numbers under my breath. I needed every detail logged before I sent the invoice. Just as I was photographing a fresh crack that had formed along the edge of the middle hump, a voice called out from the sidewalk. "Morning, Mr. Truett. You building a launch ramp or something?" It was Marcus, the mail carrier. He always had a joke ready, but today he looked genuinely confused. "Speed bumps," I said, "installed yesterday without my permission." He leaned over the first bump, whistling low. "These aren't prefab either. Looks like they poured these from scratch. That's serious equipment." I nodded. "And serious damage, that section over there." "That used to be flat." Marcus straightened up, pulling his satchel higher on his shoulder. "You filing a claim?" "Already drafted, and if they think they can ignore it, they're in for a surprise." He gave me a knowing look. "Good, we've had our own spats with Willow Heights over mailbox placement." They tried to tell us we had to relocate all the boxes to a centralized hub halfway down the street. Got the postmaster involved. Didn't end well for them. That got a chuckle out of me. Appreciate the intel. Marcus tipped his cap and continued up the street. I went back inside and fired off the invoice with attached documentation to the HOA's official email and copied the city zoning office for good measure. I didn't expect a response right away, but I got one 4 hours later. A terse email from Todd Renner, the HOA's so-called legal chair, full of vague references to community easement allowances and emergency safety measures, followed by a flat refusal to pay anything. He closed with a line that made me pause and reread twice. All further communications should go through our firm, Penmore and Lathley. That was new. They'd never used outside counsel before. Either they were bluffing or they knew they'd messed up and were trying to cover their tracks fast. I called my attorney, Evelyn Cho. She picked up on the second ring. Already saw the photos, she said. You've got a strong case. I filed a preliminary notice with the county. They'll want to see the easement details, but based on your deed and the land survey, this isn't even a gray area. I figured as much, I said. But now they're claiming they had safety authority and they're lawyering up. That's a bluff. If they had authority, they'd have filed a permit. I checked no permit application, no notification to the city, and no environmental impact assessment for the poured concrete. That makes it unauthorized construction on private property, which is criminal trespass. And depending on how they handled waste disposal from the job, possibly a violation of state environmental codes. That was more than I expected. I thanked her and hung up, feeling the first real surge of momentum since this mess started. The next day, I filed a formal complaint with the city's code enforcement office. I included photos, timestamps, and the email trail. I also dropped off a copy of my deed and a notarized statement confirming that the road in question was under my sole ownership and had no shared access agreements with the HOA. 3 days later, a city inspector named Ron Blakely showed up unannounced. He looked like he'd been doing this job since the Carter administration and had the clipboard to prove it. "Mr. Truett," he asked, stepping out of his truck. "I'm here about the unauthorized construction." I led him down the road, pointing out each speed bump and the sections where runoff had already started eroding the edges. He took notes, measured the incline angles, and even scraped a sample of the concrete mix into a plastic bag. "Did they pour this on site?" he asked. "They brought in a mobile mixer, no trucks, just barrels and a generator," he grunted. "That's a violation right there. No containment barriers, no drainage plan." "And this one here," he tapped the side of the tallest bump with his boot, "exceeds the legal height limit for residential traffic zones." "What does that mean?" "It means someone's getting fined. And if this was done without a permit, the city's going to want it removed. At their expense." That night, I received an anonymous envelope shoved through my mail slot. No return address, no stamps. Inside was a folded HOA meeting transcript clearly not meant for public circulation. It was a printed Zoom call log, and near the bottom, I found what I was looking for. "Vanessa, we can't wait for permits. The Truett property is setting a bad precedent. If we don't show we have control over adjacent areas, others will start making exceptions too. Todd, we'll call it a safety measure. As long as no one files a report, we can say it was urgent. Vanessa. If he complains, we'll say it's a community decision." That was it. The smoking gun. They'd admitted to bypassing city protocol because they were worried about losing influence, not safety. I brought the transcript to Evelyn the next morning. She read it once, then again, slower the second time. "This is evidence of premeditated fraud," she said. "They knew they were acting outside their authority and moved forward anyway. That opens them up to punitive damages. Can we press charges? We'll start with a cease and desist order and a civil suit, but if you're serious, I'll forward this to the district attorney's office." They can determine if it meets the threshold for criminal misconduct. I'm serious, she nodded. Then I'll draft the paperwork today. By the end of the week, the HOA received a cease and desist letter served by a deputy from the sheriff's department. Vanessa was spotted standing in her driveway, visibly shaken as the officer handed her the envelope. But the real blow came 2 days later, when code enforcement issued an official removal order. The HOA had 10 business days to demolish the speed bumps and restore the road to its original condition, or face daily fines of up to $500. I stood at the edge of my property that afternoon, watching the neighborhood buzz with whispers. A few residents who had previously kept their heads down now began asking questions. One even approached me, Sarah, who lived 2 lots over. "We didn't vote on any of this," she said quietly. "Vanessa told us the board approved it unanimously. But no one I've talked to even knew it was happening. She made the decision herself," I told her, "and now she's dragging the whole HOA down with her." Sarah frowned. "We're going to call an emergency board meeting. There's talk of a vote to remove her." "Let me know when that happens," I said. "I'll bring the popcorn." The following morning, construction crews returned, but this time under the watchful eye of a city inspector. They spent the entire day jackhammering the speed bumps out, hauling chunks of concrete away and trying to smooth over the gouged gravel. I made sure to film every second. By sunset, the road was mine again, still scarred but mine, and the $10,000 invoice, that was now just the down payment. 3 days after the removal order was enforced, I got a call from Evelyn while I was reseating the torn-up shoulder of the driveway. She didn't usually waste time on small talk. "They've escalated," she said. "Willow Heights HOA just filed a counterclaim." "For what?" I asked, wiping sweat from my brow. "They're alleging that your road created a nuisance condition that endangered the neighborhood. They're trying to frame your private drive as a liability to the community." "It's flimsy, but it's enough to stall the civil suit." I dropped the rake. "They're trying to turn their mistake into my fault. They're grasping," she said, "but it tells me something else too. They're scared." I paced to the edge of the gravel, staring down the slope where the speed bumps had once been. "What's our move?" "I'm requesting an evidentiary hearing. We'll need more than pictures now, we need testimony. If we can show they acted with intent to deceive, I can fast-track this to a judge." The next 48 hours were a blur. I reached out to neighbors who'd been on the fence. Some were hesitant, but once I mentioned the city had already issued violations, more began opening up. One of them, a retired engineer named Neil who lived across the street, had kept detailed logs of HOA meetings for years, complete with audio recordings, all perfectly legal under our state's single-party consent laws. When Neil offered up a USB drive with over a dozen meetings, Evelyn called in a paralegal to start combing through them. The bombshell came from a recording dated 6 weeks before construction started. Vanessa's voice came through faint but clear. "If we treat that road like it's part of the community, we can eventually push for a property line review. The board can claim maintenance responsibility and fold it into our jurisdiction." Another voice, possibly Todd, responded, "But it's not ours." "We'll make it ours," she said. That wasn't just overreach. That was attempted property annexation. Evelyn took the recording straight to the district attorney's office. The DA's staff didn't need long to act. 2 days later, a subpoena landed on the HOA's doorstep. The charge: attempted fraudulent misappropriation of private property. The morning after, 2 plainclothes investigators from the county's white-collar crimes division arrived at the HOA office. Vanessa wasn't there. She'd left town the night before, according to a neighbor who saw her car pulling out with luggage strapped to the roof. Not that it mattered. The HOA's board was still liable as an entity. And the paper trail we'd built: emails, service invoices, the private transcript, and now the recordings was ironclad. At the next public hearing, Evelyn and I sat in the front row. The courtroom wasn't packed, but several residents from Willow Heights sat behind us, whispering quietly as the judge entered. On the other side, Todd sat at the defense table alone, pale and visibly sweating through his collar. His attorney leaned in and whispered something that made him sink lower in his chair. The judge called the case and asked for initial statements. Evelyn stood, calm and deliberate. "Your Honor, what began as a case of unapproved construction quickly revealed a deeper pattern of misconduct. The defendant's organization not only trespassed and damaged private property, but attempted to obscure legal boundaries in order to claim ownership over something they knew was beyond their authority." She paused, letting the weight of it settle. "We have recordings, documents, and sworn testimony that show clear intent to defraud." The judge nodded slowly. "Proceed." When Todd's attorney stood, he tried to pivot, claiming the HOA acted in community interest. But when Evelyn played the audio clip of Vanessa talking about folding my property into their jurisdiction, the judge held up a hand. "That's enough." He turned to the clerk. "Schedule a full evidentiary hearing. I want this investigated thoroughly." After court adjourned, I walked out to the parking lot and found Neil waiting beside his truck. "They're done," he said, arms folded. "Maybe not all of them," I said, "but the rot's exposed now." He nodded once. "People are angry. Some of us are ready to start pushing for a full recall." That evening, an emergency meeting notice went out to all Willow Heights residents. It wasn't from the HOA. It was from a coalition of homeowners calling for a vote to dissolve the current board entirely. I wasn't technically part of the HOA, but I was invited anyway. When I showed up at the community center, the room was packed. Folding chairs filled every corner. People stood along the walls. And at the front, a printed transcript of Vanessa's recording sat taped to a whiteboard under the words, "This is who represents you." A middle-aged woman I recognized from a few blocks over stood and addressed the crowd. "We've been told this board has our best interests at heart. But they tried to steal a neighbor's land. They lied about votes, and they've cost all of us money that could have gone to real improvements." Murmurs of agreement echoed across the room. "We deserve better." A vote was held on the spot. No one from the board showed up to defend themselves. Every seat was declared vacant. Within a week, a temporary committee took over. They hired an independent auditor who revealed something even more damning. The HOA had diverted funds to pay for the speed bump construction from a reserve account meant for sidewalk repairs. That wasn't just unethical, it violated state HOA regulations. The final blow came when the DA filed formal charges against Vanessa for willful misappropriation of funds and property fraud. She was arrested in a neighboring county after being stopped for a broken taillight. 2 of the former board members were subpoenaed shortly after, including Todd. Meanwhile, Evelyn filed a civil suit for damages on my behalf. This time, there was no counterclaim, no stalling. The new committee didn't even contest it. They settled the day before trial for the full amount, $10,000 for road damage, plus an additional $5,000 for legal costs and restoration efforts. When the check arrived, it came with a formal letter of apology signed by the interim president. I deposited it the same day and used part of it to have the road professionally resurfaced. The gravel was replaced with compacted stone and a proper drainage trench. It looked better than it ever had. A month later, I threw a small cookout for the neighbors who'd backed me. Neil came by with a 6-pack. Sarah brought potato salad. Even Marcus, our mail carrier, stopped in for a burger. As the sun dipped below the trees, Neil lifted his beer in my direction. "Can't believe you took down the whole board with a driveway dispute." I raised mine in return. "They should have left it alone." From that day forward, Willow Heights operated under a new charter, one that emphasized transparency, resident voting rights, and clear boundaries literally and legally. And my road. Not a single bump in sight. The day after the settlement check cleared, I got a call from Officer Stroud, one of the detectives assigned to the white-collar division. He asked if I'd be willing to come down to the station to answer a few follow-up questions. It wasn't unexpected, but I could tell by the tone in his voice that something new had surfaced. I met him at his office that afternoon. The walls were lined with case files and a corkboard with flowcharts and tagged photos. Stroud was the kind of guy who didn't speak unless he had something nailed down. He motioned for me to sit and slid a thin file across the desk. "We finished combing through the HOA's financial records," he said. "Thanks to the forensic accountant your attorney put us in touch with. Turns out the speed bumps weren't the only thing they paid for with that reserve fund." I opened the folder and scanned the ledger printouts. There were entries for landscaping services that had never been performed, contractor fees billed to non-existent companies, and payments made to a shell LLC registered under a familiar name. "Penmore and Lathley," I said, pointing to a disbursement. "Yep," Stroud replied. "Only there's no law firm by that name. It's a fake business license registered in Nevada and tied to a P.O. box. The registered agent, Todd Renner." I leaned back in the chair. "So the fake law firm that sent me the email wasn't just a bluff, it was part of their laundering." "Exactly. They created the illusion of legal action to intimidate you while funneling HOA funds into a personal slush account. We've got records of over $30,000 misappropriated over the last year alone." "Do you have enough to charge them?" "We already did," he said. The DA filed charges against Todd yesterday: wire fraud, embezzlement, and impersonation of legal counsel. A warrant was issued this morning. He's in custody. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "There's more," Stroud continued. "We traced a contractor payment from the speed bump job to a company that doesn't hold a valid contractor's license. The owner, a guy named Brent Lacey, is on probation for prior permit violations. He was paid in cash through a third party, another shell company set up by Vanessa. She used an unlicensed contractor. Worse, she knew his license was revoked. We found emails where she instructed him to keep it quiet and use informal labor. We're charging her with conspiracy to commit fraud, misuse of community funds, and unlawful contracting. She's got a court date next month." I stood, trying to process it all. "So what happens to the HOA now?" Stroud closed the file. "With most of the board either under indictment or dissolved, the interim committee's petitioning for state oversight. It'll take time, but this neighborhood's going to be under a microscope for a while." That evening, I got a knock on the door. It was Sarah, holding a manila envelope and looking more resolved than I'd ever seen her. "We just finished the transition vote," she said. "The interim committee's stepping aside. We elected a new board, 5 members, all residents with no ties to the old guard." "Congratulations," I said, opening the screen door. "We also voted to amend the charter," she continued. "The new bylaws prohibit any action involving private property unless unanimously approved by the board and with documented consent from the affected homeowner." "Good," I said. "That should stop any future power grabs." She handed me the envelope. Inside was a notarized statement formally recognizing that my road was outside the jurisdiction of Willow Heights HOA and would remain so permanently. It was signed by every new board member. "Consider it a peace offering," she said. "And a thank you." I thanked her and watched her walk back down the hill toward her home. For the first time in months, the street felt calm, no construction noise, no blinds twitching, just quiet. Over the next few weeks, things settled into a new rhythm. The road restoration held up beautifully, and the new surface reduced runoff into the adjacent yards. A few residents even asked if the contractor I used could be hired to fix other parts of the neighborhood. I passed along the number with one condition: get permits and get it in writing. Evelyn wrapped up the last of the civil filings. We didn't pursue additional damages beyond the settlement the new board was trying to rebuild, and I wasn't interested in bleeding them dry. Still, the judge imposed a restitution order on Vanessa and Todd if and when they were convicted. They'd be paying back every penny they stole. The day Todd's trial began, Local news vans showed up outside the courthouse. The headline on the evening broadcast said it all. HOA board accused of embezzlement, fraud and scheme to seize private property. Vanessa's mugshot followed, looking a far cry from the confident woman who once told me my road was part of the community. They both pled not guilty, but the evidence was overwhelming. Between the emails, fake contractor payments, and shell firms, the prosecution had a timeline that spanned nearly 18 months. Testimonies from residents, former board members, and even the unlicensed contractor sealed it. It took the jury less than 2 hours. Todd was sentenced to 6 years with no eligibility for parole until year 4. Vanessa received 4.5, plus mandatory restitution, and a 10-year ban from serving on any HOA or nonprofit board. The judge called her actions an egregious abuse of neighborly trust and civic responsibility. Back in Willow Heights, the new board held their first open meeting in the community park rather than the clubhouse, symbolic, they said, of their commitment to transparency. Every resident was invited. No closed-door votes, no procedural trickery. Marcus, the mail carrier, even showed up during his break and gave a short speech about how peaceful the route had become. At the end of the meeting, Neil stood up and proposed renaming the road that led to my property. The idea got some laughs, but it passed unanimously. They named it Truett Lane. The city approved the signage a few weeks later. It wasn't an official street change, just a posted nameplate at the base of the drive, mounted on a cedar post next to the newly planted dogwood tree. Every time I pulled in, I saw it there. A small reminder of how far things had come. From a rogue speed bump to a full-blown criminal trial, it had been a long haul. But in the end, the truth held. The community rallied. And the people who tried to twist the rules for power and profit got exactly what they deserved. Justice wasn't always fast. But when it came, it hit harder than a truckload of concrete.